So we're going to start momentarily.
All right.
Okay, we're about to start. If you could all take your seats again, please. I had actually worked pretty hard to develop introductions for some of our guests, but then I realized we had a program that described everybody in some detail. So my introductions are very brief, but please take a look at the knowledge and experience that are represented on this panel. I encourage you to do that. We're very grateful for people like these panelists and all of our speakers taking the time to be here. This is a donation of their time to share their knowledge and experience with us. This is meant to be a panel regarding the challenges of transit-oriented development. You've heard a lot about it. If I could ask everybody to take a seat, please. And if you're speaking, turn to your neighbor and do this. Shh. Thank you very much. We have an hour with this panel, and we should use every minute of it. I've asked them to each just introduce their area in about a 5-minute presentation, but after that, we want to have about 40 minutes of interactive discussion. We'll have some floor microphones out. As they're speaking, please think about what's on your mind that you could either share or ask. We tried to, you'll see, look at 4 different challenge areas. It wasn't all that easy because we had to group some because there's so many challenges. But Gail Jennings is going to speak about the first steps in a development project. And George, has anybody not heard of Department of Planning and Permitting? Well, you will. George is here to talk about how to navigate your way through that department. Christine Camp with Avalon Development is here to talk about the project design considerations. And then Scott Rodie, who goes back as long as I do with the Brownfields program. He's been involved with risk management with Bank of Hawaii for quite a long time. So let me start with welcoming Gail Jennings to open this panel up. Gail, thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me? All right. I am very delighted to be here and to have this opportunity to speak about my most favorite subject in the world, and that is TOD. There is no place on earth I'd rather be than here on Oahu doing the work I'm doing. For me, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a seminal moment in time where, if we work together, think really big, use our smarts and persist, we will prevail and change the way we live for generations to come. I am a true blue believer in the power of TOD to transform both the landscape and the way people live to a more humane, connected, and sustainable way. As with anything that shifts society significantly, development around our rail stations will not be easy. There's certainly no surprise in that. But we are capable, we are smart, and we have access to a wealth of information about TOD. While Oahu is a unique and special place, the challenges we face of implementing TOD have been faced and overcome with remarkable results all around the world. As a very smart friend of mine said yesterday, we are not inventing TOD, we are perfecting it. At the very core, success with TOD requires a shared vision. Individuals and institutions willing to stand up and articulate that vision and the will to get it done. My topic today is first steps in TOD development. As real estate advisors, we frequently work with developers and investors who have concepts they want to bring to life. We seek out the suitable properties and create teams to help them realize those plans. However, my focus today is on the person who owns property with TOD development potential, who is not a developer, and who is interested in possibly pursuing TOD development. Where did they start? And how do they even figure out if it makes sense? Fortunately, the basics of development are knowable, and while there are nuances and different ways of putting deals together, the fundamentals are the same. And this is a large part of what we do every day. Connect the dots for property owners. There we go. All right. Connect the dots for these property owners, and successful development requires a team, and we help put that team together and keep that team moving forwards toward the goal. So you've got your property owners and land. You can't do development without property, so that is the fundamental thing. You have your government agencies, and they're critical because they make the rules and the regulations, and there's a natural push and pull between the private sector and the government regulators. However, we are at a particularly advantageous moment because there is a strong will on the part of the government to see TOD done and done right. So I think it's a plus for us. Then you have the developers, and in this category I put these people that I call the make it work. These are the people who make it happen. They're your architects, your planners, the environmental specialists, like we've had several today, and that's been very informative, and attorneys and engineers. So these are the developers. Then you have capital. And a lot of people think about money and it comes from a bank, but that is not necessarily true. When you're talking about development, there are private investors, there are equity funds, and there are equity funds that look specifically for TOD projects. So the first thing you do is you look at the property and you determine what the highest and best use is based on the TOD zoning that's available. So we look at market aspects. What are the demographics of the area? What would work here? What is missing? And what do people need or want? This includes walking the neighborhood, talking to people and businesses, holding focus groups, and connecting with community leaders. We also talk to the team at DPP TOD. They have keen insights, and they've spent years working on these plans to develop the neighborhood plans. So it makes absolute sense to engage with them early and often. Now, once you determine what you can build, then you start looking at the practicalities, such as how much is it going to cost? What are the potential returns? If the numbers don't quite work, can we get creative? Maybe we can do the project in phases. Are there incentives available from the government? Are there specific grants available? This is where working with a strong team pays off, because things like low-income tax credits and foundational grants, just to name a couple, practically require a specialist. And there is the need for money. Development does not happen without it. Access to capital is always a challenge, and finding ways to allow developers to keep capital circulating and leveraging further development is critical. It can be done. There are many positive examples of public-private partnerships as well as private equity funds that look specifically for TOD projects. As a community, we need to consider all the possibilities and be willing to explore and implement programs and policies that have proven successful in other TOD communities. Business as usual is not going to get this done. The last couple of things I would say to someone who thinks they would like to pursue TOD development: 1, start now. And 2, expect to see a finished product in 3 to 5 years. There will be ups and downs, bumps in the road, and even some detours, but with your destination firmly in mind, a flexible attitude, and persistent effort from your dedicated team, you will one day be able to point with great pride to something solid and real and say, I built that, and it changed our island for the better. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Gail. George, would you like to come over here? George Atta, Director of the Department of Planning and Permitting. Give us an overview of your activities, how we can get through your... George, it's nice to have you.
Thank you, Davis. Yeah, it's good to be here. And Davis, I haven't seen you in a while, but it's good to see you. Yeah, so yeah, the topic I was given was navigating through DPP. And I just, by that topic, it's implied that it's a treacherous or difficult course. And unfortunately, it's sometimes true. But anyway, I'd like to just give a short overview of DPP. We're the city's Department of Planning and Permitting. And so all the land use permits and regulations come through the department. And as far as the TOD focus goes, I want to mention that Harrison's team, many of whom are here today, is the newest official division in TOD. 3 years ago, there was no TOD division, but the mayor has emphasized TOD as a major component of his policy initiatives, and so we've created an official team, and Harrison's team actually, officially as a civil service division, is less than a year old. But it does, the fact that we've made it a civil service division shows you that we see it as a long-term thing, and we see it as an ongoing thing. So with that as the structure of the department, I think Harrison in his previous discussion mentioned some of the process that we're going through. So we're building, we've already made most of our TOD area plans, and these are being adopted by council, and I think Tim mentioned that two areas have been adopted, and following, and we're working on all of the rest of them. Several of them are close to going to city council. Following the TOD plans, there's a zoning that's involved that follows each plan. The zoning is the thing that really regulates. The plans set the vision, the zoning regulates. And the first of the zone changes, the Waipahu zone changes, just coming to council pretty soon. So these are the things that implement. And as an interim, when we first started the TOD, we knew the zoning and planning and zoning would take a while. So with the help of the council, we instituted the interim planning zoning. And what it is, it's a process where developers can come in, and even though the zoning is not in place, if the plan or draft plan is in place, we can negotiate, incentives, density bonuses, and things even before the zoning is officially adopted by council. It's an interim plan, but it's a way we knew that because of the length of the process, that we needed an interim mechanism to, give people the ability and for us to capture the opportunities that TOD represents. That's the overall structure, structure of TOD within DPP. But I think the essence of the topic that I was really asked to talk about was how to navigate through the DPP. And they asked me to answer several questions about, what DPP can do for you and what you have to, must or should do for DPP, and 5 things to know about DPP and 5 pitfalls to go through. So I'll just kind of run through these things. The first thing is that DPP can do for you is that when you come with a project, each project is different, and the rules applied to each project are different. So that the first thing that we can do is, depending on what your project is, if you come and have a pre-consultation meeting, we can sit down and identify what process your project needs to go through. And so it's like helping you map the strategy and the schedule. So that's something we definitely can do. The other thing we can sometimes do it, and this is due to the mayor's directive to us that we should not operate in silos, is that much of the permitting process involves other agencies. And so, we send it out, the application out, and it sits at another agency. And so sometimes we're able to assist in getting the other agency's review to go faster, depending on what it is. So we can assist in that area. The other thing is in these processes, we're able to provide options. There's a phrase that there's different ways to do something, and trying to assess which pathway is the best or the most efficient for you is something we can assist in doing. And at the end of the day, as every problem will run into problems and issues, DPP also has the authority to grant waivers, exemptions, and sometimes provide incentives. So all of those things, and again, you have to ask. Otherwise, we don't know what to answer. So it's important that throughout the whole process that you ask a lot of questions. And then, what should the applicant do for DPP to help in the process? The first thing really is to have a clear plan, clear goals of what you are trying to achieve when you come in for the early meetings as well as during the process. The other thing sounds very simple, but it says is to have a complete application. That sounds like a no-brainer, except that we receive lots of applications or project proposals that are half-baked or don't have the proper documentation, the proper signatures from the real landowners versus lessees, and all the conditions that apply to the land. So having a complete application is very important in helping us move the process forward. And so, and that's to get started. Now, what to know about DPP? I kind of had to think about this thing. But the first thing you should know about DPP is we're a schizophrenic agency. and the reason we are is that we have many different missions inside our department. As the title states, the planning agency. The planning agency is the visioning agency for the city. So that portion of DPP that plans, TOD is more closer to the planning side, identifying what and articulating the city's vision. And so that part is one thing. It's forward-looking, it's broad-looking, and it seeks to facilitate things. But the second half of DPP says permitting. That's the regulatory side. That's following the rules, the rulemaking. And so that's the part where the staff that works on the permitting side tend to view themselves as gatekeepers. So you have to get through the gates. So one part of the department wants to facilitate projects. The other one forces you to go through all the hoops and cross and dot the I's, cross the T's, and so that we have within the department these two polar sides of the development process. So we both facilitate and then create the hurdles that you have to go through. So that's why we have the schizophrenic thing. And DPP also has a further function of doing inspections and compliance. So I have an enforcement regulatory arm that's attached to DPP. So it's a very diverse agency, and you have to recognize that depending on which staff person you're talking to, you might get hit with a very friendly, supportive comment or a very rigid, preventive kind of response. And so with that, the first thing that I'd like to tell people is that when you come and ask questions, never assume that the first answer you have is the final answer. Because people get discouraged. They come to the department, talk to one or two people, get a certain kind of sometimes a bureaucratic answer, sometimes a complicated technical answer, and they kind of get stuck, and they're not sure what to do. And they're not sure if the department is being supportive or opposes the project. So, but be persistent and keep asking, and don't assume that the first answer is always the right answer or the final answer. So that's something that you should know about DPP. The other thing I want us to say is that don't try to take shortcuts. I think when you're going through the process, and don't assume that silence means no problems. Silence sometimes means it's just sitting there. So so be a pest, be a polite pest if you want your project to move forward. And sometimes the issues holding it up are internal to the agency. Sometimes it's external to the DPP. But the only way you're going to know is to be a polite pest and don't assume silence is good. And the other thing that you should not do with us is that some applicants use the department as a quality control for the project, and they bring in applications that have not been properly vetted. It could have been vetted from the outside, but it gets vetted inside, and so they use the department as a quality control. And when that kind of approach is used, it becomes a long back and forth kind of argument and negotiation with the department. So try not to use our staff as a quality control thing. And so with that, I think the other thing to remember, especially in TOD related stuff, is that land use is a highly political process. So it's important that you do your community work. If you work really hard to engage with the community, resolve the issues, and many of the issues are perceived more than real, but perception in politics is real. So really work with that, because if you've done a good job of community engagement, it really helps DPP move forward on a more rational basis in helping you move your projects forward.
Thank you very much, George. That was a good, honest assessment, I think. Not sure you'll be happy, but we are recording this, so if anybody wants to play that back. Next, we're going to have Christine Camp, Chief Executive Officer of Avalon Development. It's a pleasure to have her here, going to speak to you about project design considerations. Christine?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I am, by the way, wasn't that a refreshing comment from George? So that's why, as developers, we're Teflon. They say no to us, we keep coming back and trying to see that we, get the answer that we want. But what I want to do before I start my presentation is I want to know who is a landowner here among us. I see that Kamehameha Schools is here, and I think I said D.R. Horton here too, but you guys are big landowners, and so you kind of know the lay of the land. Who are small landowners here along the transit routes? Okay, so there are some of you here, and of course consultants who work with them. Because really, a lot of the things that are covered today is really for you to be supported, because the larger landowners have been working at this for many, many years. I mean, Kamehameha Schools, I think they've been planning for their TOD areas for the last 9-10 years, and only now we're starting to see the fruits of their labor. So for small landowners, I mean, how are you going to really navigate here? So I know I have 5 minutes, and I have 10 slides, so I'm going to talk really fast. Can you tell me when I'm at my 4 minutes? Okay. So, yeah, technically challenged. So for TOD development, and this has been all talked about up until now, so I'm really repeating myself, but really it's the vision thing, like George Bush said, that vision thing. It really is all about vision, because for TOD to be successful, it can't be a project in silo. The whole community has to be behind it, and everything has to be built around it. You can't just have a transit station and think that that's the panacea for a transit development project. There's got to be a whole lot of planning behind it. And that's where we look to, Harrison or the city for the guidance, because one developer alone or one landowner alone can't make that happen. You really have to look to the community, and you need the strength of the government behind you. So I'm so glad that we have an agency dedicated to TOD, because we're going to need it. Site control. So the areas that you see where a lot of the development activities are happening is where you have concentrated ownership, like D.R. Horton in East Kapolei. You've got, Kapalama, and in HCDA's Kaka'ako, because you have concentrated land ownership. But in other areas, it's going to be very, very challenging. So for independent developers like myself and landowners working with very small landowners, it's going to require some discussions among many different landowners. Like in Kalihi, I was just talking to an owner of a Kalihi property, 4,000 square foot land. And that entire area is surrounded by 4,000 and 5,000 square foot land parcels. How do you get any meaningful area redeveloped unless all those owners agree to do at some level, participate in that vision? And there are lenders too. I mean, these are not properties that are free and clear. You got mortgages on them. So the lenders have to be on board as well. And then, of course, it's all about the market. I don't care if the TOD is there, if the vision is there, or what have you, but if there's no market that can support it, if someone can't come in and buy a unit that's developed there, or a realtor, or excuse me, not a realtor, but a retail, operator says, well, you know what, we can't go there because there's not enough parking, or it doesn't have quite the visibility we want, then there is no project. So it's really market driven. So all of the design consideration has to consider the market first, has to control the site control aspect of it. You have to know how much land area you have to develop, and then the entitlement complexities. We know that real estate development is fairly complex. As George has said, when someone says no to you, you got to come back again. Have a conversation. Environmental, you've got to talk to Department of Health. I mean, these are all reused areas. You are going to have environmental issues in these things. But then there's the TOD aspect of it. So we have to look at what's the vision there. And then you know that there are 9 areas, right? 9 different plans. One is not even with the cities, with the HCDA. So you got 8 separate plans that the community of those areas wanted. And you have to make sure that you're meeting their requirements. Like Waipahu, everyone's talking about density, but the top density is going to be 60 feet high. And if you can negotiate some level of bonuses, give park space or have all affordable housing, your FAR is 0.5 to 2.5. And you can go maybe up to 3.5, but how much is it going to cost you? And I see some appraisers here. How do you appraise a property that has the ability to go to 3.5 FAR, but you don't know the cost? What does that negotiation mean? How much do you pay for that? You really can't monetize it unless it's a known factor. So there's a lot of considerations to have there, and design has to follow all those complexities. There's so many layers, and you can't design until you know what those are. What is it going to cost? Yeah, okay, so the community wants everything to have tile roofs. What is that going to cost for my project? And how am I going to pay for it when everybody wants it to be affordable? So it comes down to financing. Financing is going to be key consideration for your design as well. Because the market is going to price what they're ultimately willing to pay. And then I have to make sure the financing is done. So there's the equity. There may be some initial funds, like the grant monies to do some initial studies for the sites. Maybe there's some grant monies to do land consolidation or having general agreements through the help of the TOD agencies. Maybe there is some affordable financing available for TOD transit developments, especially the early ones. Because you heard, of the 8 or 9 plans that are out there right now, only 2 are known, and that hasn't gone through zoning yet. So the visioning is done, and we love the vision that came out of it. It was a lot of work, but the zoning is not done yet. We don't know what the requirements are yet. The benefits of being along the transit route, of course, is that as an owner, like Palama Settlement, for example, they have land along the transit route. They're waiting for the rezoning to happen so that they can monetize on that when they want to redevelop that area for the nonprofit. I think that's great. So if you're along that transit route, you don't have to go through the zoning process and agree on a unilateral agreement. It's going to be done for you. And that, to me, is thumbs up. But now all the community benefits to monetize the maximum densities, who knows? How do you design around it? So we're going to have to work with the agencies to do that. It's not a bad thing, but from a developer and from financing mechanism where we have to bring the money to the table, it's very hard to determine the unknowns. So I'm going to go through the next few slides, which really, I think you've seen it also. So this is Waipahu, the areas that are already known for what the visioning is, but you can kind of see on the map that really a lot of the properties are very, very small. So, these areas need consolidation. Hopefully this particular owner wants to redevelop, but who knows? So someone is going to have to be doing a lot of advanced work, and the thing that we do have a TOD agency, hopefully they're having those meaningful discussions. So it's just, the 2 areas that have already been approved, and then of course all of the different plans. excuse me, those boxes mean that these are all different plans, but the asterisks mean that those were finally approved and many more going through the process. But as a developer, the early planning that should be done now, because as you heard this morning from Brandon Morioka, the lines are getting done. There's so much that's being done from East Kapolei to Waipahu to Leeward Community College. There's a significant amount of work that's already been done, but not a lot of TOD developments that are breaking ground yet. Why? Because still a lot to be negotiated. A lot of unknowns that have to be done. There are some early developments that have done, like MW Group has done the senior housing near the Pearl City Transit Center. Fantastic. But that wasn't transit oriented. It really was driven by market demand. The demographics called for it, and so they located it closer to the transit area. So the location specific was related to transit, but the project was not initiated as a result of the transit-oriented developments. I hope to see more of the transit-oriented developments through catalytic projects, but I'm not seeing it yet except the stations. And so we're going to see that a little bit more as we have a little more certainty to these aspects. So, here's a whole list of 11 things you could add, another 11, and probably 100 more things to a development. But where I like to look at, obviously, is controlling the property. Like I talked about, you can't do anything. We already have a vision. The city has done a really great job, and they're really telling us the story, and I believe it. I'm an early believer. I love it. I'd love to see more of it. But we've got to control the property and assemble the properties. Market feasibility is a major item, and assembling the capital stack. I hope that there are more grants, public financing, tax credits to allow us to supplement the debt and the equity that will come in later. Because without it, for the early developments to come in and take these risks, the early thing, like you don't want to be the pioneers that got shot by the Indians, right? Or got the arrows on their back. You want to be the guys that come in after the settlements. And so the early ones really need a lot of support. And I know that the city is looking for many ways, and I hope that we'll see more of that. This is parameters that I just looked up at. The catalytic TOD projects, things that would generate more market interest are things like government offices and establishments. Would love to see more of that around the TOD. I mean, if you're looking for developers and landowners to invest in these areas, bring the services there. Because can you imagine if planning department moved to one of these TOD areas? How many architects and engineers and planners would move nearby? Educational facilities, you guys are already doing that, and so I think that's wonderful. So just some of the things that will generate more activities in these areas. I got this from one of the TOD write-ups as it relates to capacity for redevelopment, what areas you would see most likely new developments. Here's land availability. So you got, Kapolei has a lot of land, Ho'opili, Leeward, but market strength. Where's the maximum demand and value, highest value? You see Ala Moana. Even though Ala Moana is the last stop, there's a lot of interest and development happening in Ala Moana and Kaka'ako areas, Kapalama, Pearl Highlands. So these are areas where, a lot of activities are seen, even though they're a little bit later on in the stages, because that's where the market demand is. So my thing is, this is not really a design consideration, but it should be a policy design consideration related to challenged TOD areas. Waipahu is I'll consider a challenged TOD area because the demographics in the area. And so I would love to see more gap investment financing available through government agencies to support the early onset development planning of that area and to consolidate land. And then areas in the strong TOD areas, the market demand is going to meet it. So I think it's just a matter of making sure you have known aspects that allows the proper design. This is another suggestion. So, in underutilized areas, say you have 20,000 square feet. It's low. It's a warehouse facility worth $5 million, and they're paying taxes on $5 million. So at $12.50 per thousand, it's pretty insignificant. But suppose that there was $100 million more spent because you're going high rise, and the developer put dollar for dollar those investments into that property. The city, without investing in anything, will generate the higher property taxes for the foreseeable future because the developer and landowner invested there. Just by putting investment into there, the city has benefited, not in the terms of, of course, lifestyle and TOD developments, but the increased value has increased cash flow to the city. Can we find some way to monetize that, to support affordable housing that we want to see? I was reading a lot of articles over the years about people saying, well, TOD is taxpayers' money. We're spending all of this money for benefiting the landowners and developers. But really, the developers are putting their at-risk money into this area to create tax dollars. Whether that development succeeds or not, the value has been added and the tax benefit has already been generated to the city. And to me, a part of that, maybe not all of it, should be given back to the projects. Maybe there may be a bond floated so that we can give vouchers to people who are in the affordable housing category. If you buy in the TOD area, you get a 3% deposit at 0% interest for 10 years. I don't know. I mean, be creative, but there is some way to monetize this. I'd love to see that because that would really make the projects work. So those are some considerations, but really leave the vision. The city's doing a wonderful job of that, and all the rest, the first-in benefits for developers, and hopefully we can find some monetization. Am I done? Okay, so if you have questions, but thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Oh, yes, that was quite wonderful. Thank you very much. Next is Scott Rodie from Bank of Hawaii, Chief Appraiser and Risk Manager for many years. Scott, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Davis. I'm going to start out with an apology. If any of you saw my picture, that was when the Clinton era was still in place, so I'm going to have to get Davis a new photo. And I'd also like to thank Gail for taking all my points. So thank you. Any question? No. Davis, actually, usually I speak on environmental issues specifically. I'm not a lender. I work for a lender. I'm involved heavily in the process, but I am not a loan officer for the bank. I work with our commercial real estate loan division and putting together deals. So bear with me, and I'll take you through a few things that lenders are looking at. What am I here? What do banks want in terms of the information necessary to lend on proposed development sites? The answer is everything. Banks do not like uncertainty, and banks will price for risk. So the more comprehensive your package, the better. The more thought through, the better. The more your team is involved upfront with your lender, with the DOH, with the planners, the better. Things get done quicker when you have control of all of that aspect that the lender will have to consider. What's the need? We're an island community. We have scarce available resources. Urban sprawl out into the hinterland creates problems in terms of life quality for our domestic, for our population, as well as the tourism satisfaction goes down as traffic increases. Reuse of existing urban and core proximate sites is extremely important, somewhat challenging, but let's put it this way. I try to live as I preach. I've lived here for 15 years now. I've put 23,000 miles on my car. I live about a block away from my office. I truly believe in the concept of vertical living as a solution to a lot of our problems. Project attributes that the bank looks for. Christine spoke about this. We look at economic feasibility and effective demand. We look at market studies by reputable and independent consultants to address feasibility issues going in, which again, more information is better. If you are trying to figure out what your costs are, if you haven't got budgets, if you haven't got plans and specifications, you're probably a little bit early getting to your lender. You need to have all these things buttoned down before you come in and ask for our help. We like, in terms of TOD product, which is appropriate to the market, complementary uses that create a sense of place within the urban core and transit corridor, project characteristics that enhance quality of life, promote the ability to enjoy support and entertainment uses in the absence of an automobile. Borrower, what is the lender looking for in a borrower? Experience matters. Given the scope and nature of TOD projects, many of the things that we see coming to the forefront are mixed use, basically high-rise, high-density residential uses above a commercial or retail platform. So banks are looking for people that have experience in delivering that product to our market. A strong capital position, a demonstrated history to solve problems through the development from soup to nuts. We want to see people that have had experience in dealing with DPP, working with the Department of Health in terms of solving environmental related problems that they run into. And key, and going to Gail's point, it's all a team, but we look at the team very important. So the most important factor that we look at is who's your architect, engineer, your environmental consultant, where are your market studies, did you get preliminary appraisals on the property at 3.5 times FAR, 7 times FAR. We want to know as much about your property as you do, and we have a very brief time to look at it. Lender, what should you look for in a lender? Again, experience. History and familiarity with the product type that you're trying to bring to the market. Their support team, what is your bank support team? Is there a strong link between the actual lender, your loan officer, the credit approval authority, underwriting, documentation, construction monitoring and disbursement, appraisal, and environmental risk? Look, their team should be working together. They should not be diametrically opposed. Ability to work with you. If there's a problem, and there probably will be at some point in the development process, you should have a lender that you have comfort with, and that has the ability to work with you in the event that you do have issues. Financial strength through market cycles, growth, stabilization, and decline. Bank of Hawaii during the Great Recession took back one property, had one commercial foreclosure throughout the Great Recession. Broad financial products and structures consistent with the project scale and type. Basics of the deal. What we look for, we want complete information packages, entitlements, plans, specs, budgets, critical paths, multiple cost bids or construction contracts, feasibility studies, marketing plans, end user purchase and sale agreements, pre-leases. More information is better than less. Informational shortfalls create delays. Equity, in terms of what equity we expect, 30 to 40% of cost. Depending on price points, the higher the price point, the greater the equity. And what I'm talking about price points is we'll have different requirements for somebody bringing $600,000 condos to the market as somebody who's bringing $6 million condos to the market. Land equity, land can count towards equity, but not entirely. A minimum of 15% cash is generally required. We look for recourse. Interest rates are floating, usually LIBOR based. And pre-sales for the projects that we see coming to our bank are absolutely required. 65 to 70% of the units must be pre-sold, basically up to the point where the bank's exposure is taken out, and that's typical in the market area. Let's see what else we can get through here. Strategy, how do I maximize my chances with the lender? These are all questions that I think that were preloaded for the presentation here, but provide project documentation that's comprehensive. Financial requests should be clear and fully developed from the project start to end unit sales and leasing. Introduce your lender to your development team. The team should be seasoned, well qualified, and experienced in similar projects. And I would be prepared to respond to inquiries that may be generated by various support team members, our underwriter, our appraisal area, our environmental risk area. Delayed and incomplete responses tend to hold up the process. And I think you want to save 15 minutes at least. So I've got like 78 other slides. And I apologize for anybody that's here from Kamehameha Schools. We're talking about land recycling. This is a recycled PowerPoint. And Davis has it. I'm sure you can contact him, and he has my permission to go ahead and give you guys a copy of the PowerPoint. Thank you, Davis.
Thank you very much, Scott. By the way, all the PowerPoints will be available on the Center for Creative Land Recycling website probably tomorrow. With that, we have two people out there with floor microphones. Who has a question for one of our panelists? Don't make me ask the question, please.
Okay, can I start things off?
Yes. Do.
Okay. There are a couple of points brought up that Christine brought up about financing tools. One, and I've heard this before mentioned in the islands, is tax increment or maybe a financing district. Is there any your crystal ball, is there going to be any kind of tax increment or other kind of financing district on the island?
There's been a lot of discussions about the tax increment financing, but that requires landowner participation. So it'll probably be most likely in areas where there's concentrated land ownership, like Kanemia Schools areas, or maybe it might be B.R. Horton's master plan, but George might have a better perspective on that.
Actually, the issue of tax increment financing has been a long-running debate in the city, and there's some question about the constitutionality of it in Hawaii, and so there's been discussion as to whether we need a legislative clarification about its constitutionality. Internally with the cities, we've had some, I guess, discussion as to whether the city should move forward with it, and we've had conflicting advice from bond counsel as to whether it's something the city can move forward with. I can tell you that in general, that this administration would like to move forward to clarify the legal aspect of it, and then at some point in the future, the actual implementation of tax increment financing is, I think, a political question. I think the homeowner, property owner requirement would vary depending on how the legal decision is made, because if the other financing, like improvement districts, we have a very high threshold of property owner participation before we can impose a district. So depending on what percentage of landowners is needed for such a district to be placed, that would be part of the discussion and clarification for the regulations. But we are in process, and there is active interest, possibly some legislation in the coming session to clarify the constitutional question.
Thank you, George. Who has another question? Really? Okay. Somebody think of a question. I'll ask Gail. I'm curious. Can the real estate advisor be the center point of the team that Christine and Scott were talking about? I mean, when they say, who's your team, can the advisor be the team leader?
Well, it depends on what type of owner that you're working with, because if you're working with an owner who's new to doing this sort of thing, a developer and someone who's as experienced as Christine can be talking over their heads sometimes, occasionally. And if you've got the relation, I mean, brilliant, right? You know, but she knows so much, and to actually translate what's going on to somebody who's perhaps inexperienced, and we're the people, I mean, I don't know how many hours that we have spent walking places like Waipahu and Aiea and Kalihi and just talking to people there. And we know, because we know what's going on in these specific areas very intimately. And one of the other things is there's a gracious attitude on the part of people like Christine and some of the other developers. You bring something to them, they want to include you, they want to work with you. And also from a Colliers point of view, we have a national TOD. And so we have access to equity and capital that is international. The people who are actually looking for that you don't typically find here. And Harrison mentioned the Beltline in Atlanta, the MARTA. Colliers participated in finding money, doing that sort of thing. So that's part of what we can do. We don't have to be the center of it, but we can certainly help.
Thank you.
I was going to say, Gail's got a lot of great resources internally. They have actually internal research department. They have an appraisal area. They have a great deal of resources just for general information when you're getting early into the process. That is a critical part of the team. So we work pretty consistently with Bobby and such. So
thank you. Anybody think of a question?
I have another question, and then Davis is going to give an iPad to the next person that gives a question.
Yeah.
Anyway, the question is, Gail, you had mentioned that if you have a project, you should go out early to the community and tell people what your project is. But, and I guess this is for the whole panel, is that I own 4,000 square feet. I have a little project. I mean, how do I get started about something like that? How do I start marketing my ideas, my projects? I mean, is there a forum for that, or is that something that the city can help with? This is to the whole panel.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, you can't actually do 4,000 square feet right now, right?
I guess it depends what you define as a TOD project. I mean, the interim zoning that I mentioned has a minimum 20,000 square foot lot before you can get involved in that procedure. But that's not to say that anybody under existing zoning or under mixed use zoning can't start a project that's TOD oriented.
So as a developer, you know, we would look at an area that might be ready for development, and we might work with someone like Gail and start to talk to some of the landowners, because you don't want to be the landowner, the last guy in, and then have one parcel surrounded by all these major projects. And as a transforming community, you don't want that one parcel to affect the rest of the community either. So we would have to rely on people like Gail who connect others and try to consolidate the ownership and come up with a form that would be value added for everyone involved. So it is a challenge. That's what I'm talking about for the additional complexity. There's more risk involved because it takes so much time. Some people have owned these properties for generations, and they just can't let go of it, or they can't get consensus within their own families. And so the planning takes many, many years, whereas a single owner, it might take a long time. Trying to consolidate blocks without some strength behind, you know, having government support to motivate some of them, or having huge incentives for these landowners to consolidate their block with the larger blocks, it is very difficult. That's one of the biggest challenges.
Yes, Scott?
One thing for small property owners that are in these development areas, you have 4,000 square foot piece of land, what's surrounding you, who owns that property. That's why you hire consultants, appraisers, to figure out what the highest and best use, as Gail mentioned earlier, but also what your property is really worth. You may be able to sell off transferable development rights to an abutter. You may be able to sell that entire property to an abutter who's going to be able to utilize your density. So make sure if you're a small property owner, you know what you have, so you aren't being taken advantage of by somebody who understands exactly the value of your property.
Sounds like, yes, thank you, Emma. Question? Yes, thank you.
We have a 60,000 square foot lot in the Colliers area, right within the transit-oriented development.
Speak up, please.
We have a 60,000 square foot lot in the Colliers area. What would you recommend we start doing in terms of getting ready for redeveloping the lot?
Yeah, that's
Well,
thank you for that question.
at the risk of being terribly self-serving, call me.
You should, but you should be talking to your neighbors as well to see what their plans are. I mean, I think consolidated voices make a much stronger case for what you should be doing. But really, you can't be in a silo when you have such a small lot. You need to work with others to see what would happen. So you know all your options that are available.
Okay, speaking of neighbors, how do you convince a neighborhood board?
George?
You know, I had said in my comments that each project is different, and the approval process for each project is different. So you can't answer that kind of question generically. Some projects don't have to go to the neighborhood board for approval within the permitting requirement. Others do. So depending on what your project is, you know, whether the neighborhood board is a prerequisite or some body that you have to approach early, it depends. So again, your project defines your process. So have a clear idea of what your project is. And I think what Gail and Christine mentioned is that whether you're a big lot owner or a small lot owner, your project could be your own lot or it could be a combined lot. So depending on what your vision is, if your vision is just individual, that's one thing. But if your vision is larger than that and you need to assemble land, that's a different vision. You would have to work with your partners or your neighbors to get it. So each project is different. And depending on the kind of project, like if you're using 2 different lots, then you would need to have a joint development agreement or a lot consolidation before you can take advantage if they are. But see, so that's the kind of thing that depending on what your project, you have to have different permits, you know, or a prior permit prior to a building permit. So all of these things are very project specific and location specific.
Thank you. Maybe 2 more questions. We have one over here.
With a lot of the effort being done towards visioning and planning for TOD developments, what is the city doing to ensure that the offsite infrastructure improvements will be in place at the correct time for the developments to go through? Now they're going to make the developers pay for it.
Well, sometimes the developer can't pay for it. Sometimes they can. So this issue actually has been something that's been on the administration's mind for a long time. I don't know if Harrison mentioned the TOD sub-cabinet that the administration has formed, but the purpose of the sub-cabinet, one of its major purposes, is to identify that kind of particular question, like if we have the kind of densities we're looking for it in the plan, is the infrastructure available or adequate? And this sub-cabinet includes, you know, EMD, which handles the wastewater, and DPS with the roads. So the sub-cabinet's role and responsibility that the mayor gave us is to make sure that our infrastructure improvements can keep up with the demand and pace of development. So you ask, what are we doing? The first thing is we formed a sub-cabinet that meets regularly. We used to meet once a week, but now we're meeting maybe twice a month. But but the whole purpose is to make sure that we identify which projects on which schedule need to be done so that infrastructure doesn't become the bottleneck that slows down the front. So it's an ongoing process, and you know, we've changed the scheduling and priorities of some of our projects to make sure that the hotter markets are, you know, get addressed first. But it's a struggle, but you know, but we're aware of it, and we're working at it with that procedure.
Thank you, George. We're going to break for lunch. I just, could you, at the risk of sounding naive, FAR, what does that mean?
Floor area ratio.
Floor area ratio. It sounds like an important term from what I'm hearing.
It's the amount of square footage that can be built relative to the amount of square footage of the land. So it may range from 2.5 times the square footage of the lot to 7.
I see.
So it's a very important aspect.
I'm trying to pick up on these nuggets, like the project defines the process. That was another good nugget. One last question for you, Scott. Would you, from your dealings with the lending side, do you sense that your bank or other banks look at TOD projects as inherently more risky, or they look at all projects as projects?
It's case by case.
Case by case.
Because, I mean, while the project in and of itself being located in a TOD area may benefit from enhanced density, it's what that density includes. Are you doing, once again, $6 million condos, or are you doing affordable housing?
Mm-hmm.
So each project is assessed for its risk.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, thank you to this panel and all of our speakers. We have a buffet lunch available for everybody. We're going to have a guest speaker, Stanford Carr from Stanford Carr Development, to be speaking maybe about 20 to 25 minutes into lunch for maybe 30 minutes. So please enjoy lunch, enjoy each other, take a break, and we'll be back. I'll give you a 5-minute warning before our speaker will join us. Thank you.